Hello, this is James Hudnall, and welcome to another episode of Creative Secrets. This one is about story structure. This is an overview on the subject, and then we'll go into it in more detail in following videos. So first we want to just cover what is story structure exactly, how does it work. So imagine you have to build a house. Now, depending on how much you know about construction, you can determine how well your house is going to be, how it's going to look, how strong it's going to be, how structurally sound it's going to be. If you don't know anything, and if you don't do any research, and you don't know what you're doing, you could end up with something that's a shack that's going to fall apart, and the rain comes through the roof, and you have all kinds of other problems. If you have somebody that has construction background and you know all about architecture and things like that, your house could end up being an incredible mansion, even depending on the materials that you use and so on. So this metaphor works for the story structure. The story structure is the structure you use to build your story. Depending on how good the structure is, depends on how good the story will be. If a story is well built, then it will feel solid and it will be something that people would like to visit and hang out in. Whereas if you just make some shanty that's about to fall over, a lot of people wouldn't even want to go in. They don't even want to look at it. So obviously you want to do something that's going to be attractive and not a failure. This is why story structure is fundamentally important. When I wrote my book, The Secrets of Writing, which is available on Amazon, you can find the link below. Anyway, I wrote the book originally in the 90s, and I gave copies of the first draft to a bunch of people in the comic book industry that I knew. I mainly wanted to get their feedback to see if there was anything I was missing that maybe I should add or etc. So anyway, most of the feedback I got was really good, and that was encouraging, but there was a few people that didn't like it. And one of the responses I got was that, there's no rules to writing stories. Stories can't be written by rules. They have to be just created out of somebody's mind. I just shrugged. The thing is, there are no rules necessarily to story structure. There are guidelines, there are axioms, there are certain principles that have been proven to work for thousands of years. People have been writing about this since like Aristotle. Thousands of years ago. So story structure is something that's a proven methodology for writing stories effectively. So anyone who says you can't use rules to write a story, they obviously don't understand. It's not about rules, it's about principles that work, principles that already are known by people that have been doing this for a while. It's better to listen to people with experience rather than people with wild egos, The thing is, if something is successful, that proves that it worked and they understand some basic things that made them a success. So those things have been studied for, like I say, for thousands of years. This is not just something out of the blue. You can make your story any way you want, but there are certain things that work, and I am focusing mainly on classical story structure because classical story structure is a structure most people relate to. That's what most people like. That's what most people enjoy because it's how they see reality. You can do a story that's avant-garde and strange and dreamlike and all that stuff, but it only appeals to a certain amount of people. I happen to like certain avant-garde type stories, but I know that it's not commercial. So I'm focusing on the commercial stuff for now so that you can understand the basics, because the basics is what's needed to really do something effectively. I briefly discussed the other story structures like the hero's journey, the story circle, and the Vonnegut theory. Those are overlaying structures that are basic, easy to follow structures. But now I'm going to get into the more detailed stuff, and that's going to take several videos to cover more finer details and methodologies. And also later I'll be doing a few videos on doing more experimental type stories, avant-garde, etc. But that's down the line. And I just want to cover the basics for now, and I'll get into more advanced stuff as the series progresses. Most stories follow the 3-act structure: the opening, the conflict, and the resolution. That's what the 3 acts generally cover. The opening is all the setup, and then the confrontation is all of the action, and the resolution is the climax and the way it ends. Now, if you looked at the hero's journey, you understand that the beginning is where you initialize your hero and you set them on the path of adventure. And then there's some turning point where they enter into the unknown world. That is the first act. And then once they cross over into the unknown world, which is the world of unexpected consequences, then that is your second act. The second act is where all the crazy stuff happens. Then when you reach the point where the story gets into a serious life or death conflict, it doesn't always have to be life or death, but metaphorically it usually is, when decisions have to be made that are going to affect the outcome of the story and actions are taken to affect the outcome of the story, that is where you turn into the final act. And then the final act is where you wrap it all up. So in a nutshell, that's the 3-act structure. And I'll get into it in more detail in the next chapter. But if you understand that each act is basically a mini story in itself, and that mini story can also be divided into sub stories, which I'll get into again in another video. But your 3-act structure has an A story and sometimes a B story and sometimes a C, D, E story. You can subdivide each of the acts, but generally you have an A story as your main story, and the following of that each story has its own resolution. So you can have a story inside of a scene. A scene is a subdivision of an act. So an act is made up of scenes. You can have X number of scenes in an act. Each scene can have an act structure inside of it. You can have a beginning, middle, and end in a scene. It can be defined down to that level. You can atomize, in other words, your story, and I will get into that in more detail in following videos. But I just wanted to cover the basic idea of the story structure for now in this overview, and then we're going to get into how it breaks down, and I'm going to try to break it down as finely as I can in a way that will be done in these short videos, but then I'll refine everything as we go. So that's it for this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe. Please get your friends to subscribe. Please tell everyone you know about this channel and what I'm doing, and I'd appreciate it very much. Check my links below, and I will see you next time.